Good morning. It's time now to read once again the Pilgrim's Progress. We're nearing the end, and so we'll begin on page 141. So I saw in my dream that they went on apace before, and ignorance he came hobbling after. Then said Christian to his companion, "It pities me much for this poor man. It will surely go ill with him at last." Hopeful. Alas, there are an abundance in our town in this condition, whole families, whole streets. And if there be so in many parts, how many think you must there be in the place where he was born? Christian. Indeed, the word saith, He hath blinded their eyes, lest they should see. But now we are by ourselves. What do you think about such men? Have they at no time, think you, convictions of sin, and consequently fears that their state is dangerous? Hopeful. Nay, do you answer that question yourself? For you are the elder man. Christian. Then I say sometimes, as I think they may, but they, being naturally ignorant, understand not that such convictions tend to their good, and therefore they do desperately seek to stifle them, and presumptuously continue to flatter themselves in the way of their own hearts. Hopeful. I do believe, as you say, that fear tends much to men's good, and to make them right at their beginning to go on pilgrimage. Christian. Without all doubt it doth, if it be right, for so says the word, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Hopeful. How will you describe right fear? Christian. True or right fear is discovered by three things. By its rise, it is caused by saving convictions for sin. It driveth the soul to lay fast hold of Christ for salvation, and it begetteth and continueth in the soul a great reverence of God, his word, and ways, keeping it tender, and making it afraid to turn from them to the right hand or to the left, or to anything that may dishonor God, break its peace, grieve the Spirit, or cause the enemy to speak reproachfully. Hopeful. Well said. I believe you've said the truth. Are we now almost past the enchanted ground? Why, said Christian, are you weary of this discourse? No, verily, said Hopeful, but that I would know where we are. Christian said, We have not now above 2 miles further to go thereon, but let us return to our matter. Now the ignorant know not that such convictions that tend to put them in fear are for their good, and therefore they seek to stifle them. Hopeful said, How do they seek to stifle them? Christian replied, They think that those fears are wrought by the devil, though indeed they are wrought by God. And thinking so, they resist them as things that are directly tending to their overthrow. They also think that these fears tend to the spoiling of their faith, when alas for them, poor men that they are, they have none at all, and therefore they harden their hearts against them. They presume they ought not to fear, and therefore in spite of them they wax presumptuously confident. And they see that these fears tend to take away from their pitiful old self-holiness, and therefore they resist them with all their might. I know something of this myself, said Hopeful, for before I knew myself it was so with me. Christian said, Well, we will leave this time our neighbor Ignorance by himself, and fall upon another profitable question. With all my heart, said Hopeful, but you shall still begin. Well then, said Christian, did you not know about 10 years ago one temporary in your parts who was a forward man in religion then? Know him, said Hopeful. Yes, he dwelt in Graceless, a town about 2 miles off of Honesty, and he dwelt next door to one Turnback. Right, said Christian, he dwelt under the same roof with him. Well, that man was much awakened once. I believe that he had some sight of his sins and of the wages that was due thereto. I am of your mind, said Hopeful, for my house not being above 3 miles from him, he would ofttimes come to me, and that with many tears. Truly I pitied the man, and was not altogether without hope of him. But one may see it is not every one that cries, Lord, Lord. He told me once, said Christian, that he was resolved to go on pilgrimage, as we do now, but all of a sudden he grew acquainted with one Save Self, and then he became a stranger to me. Now, since we are talking about him, said Hopeful, let us a little inquire into the reason of the sudden backsliding of him and of such others. It may be very profitable, said Christian, but do you begin? Well then, said Hopeful, there are in my judgment 4 reasons for it. 1, though the consciences of such men are awakened, yet their minds are not changed. Therefore, when the power of guilt weareth away, that which provoked them to be religious ceaseth. Wherefore they naturally turn to their own course again, even as we see the dog that is sick of what he hath eaten. So long as his sickness prevails, he vomits and casts all up. Not that he doth this of a free mind, if we may say a dog has a mind, but because it troubleth his stomach. But now when his sickness is over and his stomach eased, his desires not at all alienate from his vomit. He turns about him and licks them all up. And so it is true that which is written, the dog is turned to his own vomit again. Thus I say, being hot for heaven by virtue only of the sense and fear of the torments of hell, as their sense of hell and the fears of damnation chills and cools, so their desires for heaven and salvation cool also. So then it comes to pass that when their guilt and fear is gone, their desires for heaven and happiness die, and they return to their course again. Secondly, another reason is they have slavish fears that do overmaster them. I speak now of the fears they have of men, for the fear of men bringeth a snare. So then, though they seem to be hot for heaven, so long as the flames of hell are about their ears, yet when that terror is a little over, they betake themselves second thoughts, namely, that it is good to be wise and not to run, for they know not what, the hazard of losing all, or at least of bringing themselves into unavoidable and unnecessary troubles, and so they fall in with the world again. Thirdly, that same shame that attends religion lies also as a block in their way. They are proud and haughty, and religion in their eye is low and contemptible. Therefore, when they have lost their sense of hell and wrath to come, they return again to their former course. Fourthly, guilt and immediate terror are grievous to them. They are not like to see their misery before they come into it, though perhaps the first sight of it, if they love that sight, might make them fly whither the righteous fly and are safe. But because they do, as I hinted before, even shun the thoughts of guilt and terror, therefore, when once they are rid of their awakenings about the terrors and wrath of God, they harden their hearts gladly, and choose such ways as will harden them more and more. Christian, you are pretty near the business, for the bottom of all is for want of a change in their mind and will, and therefore they are but like the felon that standeth before the judge. He quakes and trembles, and seems to repent most heartily. But the bottom of all is the fear of the halter, not any detestation of the offense, as is evident. Because, but let this man have liberty, and he will be a thief and a rogue still, whereas if his mind was changed, he would be otherwise. Hopeful. Now I have shewed thee the reasons of their going back. Do you shew me the manner thereof? Christian. So I will, willingly. 1. They draw off their thoughts all they may have from the remembrance of God, death, and judgment to come. 2. Then they cast off by degrees private duties, as closet prayer, curbing their lusts, watching, sorrow for sin, and the like. 3. Then they shun the company of lively and warm Christians. 4. After that they grow cold to public duty, as hearing, reading, godly conference, and the like. 5. Then they begin to pick holes, as we say, in the coats of some of the godly, and that devilishly, that they may have a seeming color to throw religion, for the sake of some infirmity they have spied in them behind their backs. 6. Then they begin to adhere to and associate themselves with carnal, loose, and wanton men. 7. Then they give way to carnal and wanton desires in secret. And glad are they if they can see such things that are in any that are counted honest, that they may the more boldly do it through their example. 8. After this they begin to play with little sins openly. 9. And then, being hardened, they show themselves as they are. They are thus being launched again into the gulf of misery, unless a miracle of grace prevent it. They everlastingly perish in their own deceivings. Now I saw in my dream that by this time the pilgrims were got over the enchanted ground, and entering the country of Beulah, whose air was very sweet and pleasant, the way lying directly to it, and they solaced themselves there for a season. Yet here they continually heard the singing of birds, and saw every day the flowers appear in the earth, and heard the voice of the turtle in the land. In this country of the sun shineth night and day. Wherefore this was beyond the valley of the shadow of death, also out of the reach of giant despair. Neither could they from this place so much as see Doubting Castle. Here they were within the sight of the city they were going to. Also here met them some of the inhabitants thereof. For in this land the shining ones commonly walked, because it was upon the borders of heaven. In this land also the contract between the bride and the bridegroom was renewed. Yea, here as the bridegroom rejoiceth over the bride, so did their God rejoice over them. Here they had no want of corn and wine, for in this place they met with abundance, that what they had sought for in all their pilgrimage. Here they heard voices from out of the city, loud voices, saying, Say ye to the daughter of Zion, Behold, thy salvation cometh. Behold, his reward is with them. Here all the inhabitants of the country called them, the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord, sought out, etc. Now as they walked in this land, they had more rejoicing than in parts more remote from the kingdom to which they were bound. And drawing near to the city, they had yet a more perfect view thereof. It was builded of pearls and precious stones, and the street thereof was paved with gold, so that by reason of the natural glory of the city and the reflection of the sunbeams upon it, Christian with desire fell sick. Hopeful also fell a fit or two of the same disease. Wherefore here they lay but a while, crying out because of their pangs. If you see my beloved, tell him that I am sick of love. But being a little strengthened and better able to bear their sickness, they walked on their way, and came yet nearer and nearer, where there were orchards, vineyards, and gardens, and the gates opened into the highway. Now as they came to these places, behold, the gardener stood in the way, to whom the pilgrims said, Whose goodly vineyards and gardens are these? He answered, They are the king's, and are planted here for his own delights, and also for the solace of pilgrims. So the gardener had them into the vineyards, and bid them refresh themselves with the dainties. He also showed them there the king's walks and the arbors, where he delighted to be. And there they tarried and slept. Now I beheld in my dream that they talked more in their sleep at this time than they ever did in all their journey. And being amused thereabout, and the gardener said even to me, Wherefore musest thou at the matter? It is the nature of the fruit of the grapes of these vineyards to go down sweetly, as to cause the lips of them that are asleep to speak. So I saw that when they awoke, they addressed themselves to go up to the city. But as I said, the reflections of the sun upon the city, for the city was pure gold, was so extremely glorious that they could not as yet with open face behold it, but through an instrument made for that purpose. So I saw that as they went on, there met them 2 men in raiment that shone like gold. Also their faces shone in the light. These men asked the pilgrims whence they came, and they told them. And they also asked them where they had lodged, and what difficulties, dangers, comforts, and pleasures they had met in the way. And they told them. Then said the men that met with them, You have but 2 difficulties more to meet with, and then you are in the city. Christian then and his companion asked the men to go along with them, so they told them they would. But, said they, you must obtain it by your own faith. So I saw in my dream that they went on together until they came to the sight of the gate. Now I further saw that betwixt them and the gate was a river, but there was no bridge to go over. The river was very deep. At the sight, therefore, of the river, the pilgrims were much astounded. But the men that went with them said, You must go through, or you cannot come to the gate. The pilgrims then began to inquire if there was no other way to the gate, to which was answered, Yes, but there hath not been any save 2, to wit, Enoch and Elijah, been permitted to tread that path, since the foundation of the world, nor shall until the last trumpet shall sound. Then the pilgrims then, especially Christian, began to despond in his mind, and looked this way and that way, but no way could be found by them by which they might escape the river. Then they asked the men if the waters were all of a depth. They said no, yet they could not help them in that case, for they said, You shall find it deeper or shallower as you believe in the king of the place. Then they addressed themselves to the water, and entering, Christian began to sink. And crying out to his good friend Hopeful, he said, I sink in deep waters, the billows go over my head, all his waves go over me. Then said the other, Be of good cheer, my fellow. I feel the bottom, and it is good. Then said Christian, Oh, the sorrows of death have encompassed me. I shall not see the land that flows with milk and honey. And with that a great darkness and horror fell upon Christian, so that he could not see before him. Also here he in great measure lost his senses, so that he could neither remember nor orderly talk of any of those sweet refreshments that he had met with on the way of his pilgrimage. So we will leave it there with Christian in the middle of that final river before he goes to the gate. Because he lives, then one day, that last verse, then one day I'll cross that river, I'll fight life's final war with pain. And so I think that hymn probably borrows not only from biblical imagery, but also from the imagery of this story. And so it'd be interesting if you read through this again or hear it again, listen to it again, to note all the hymnody that is affected by verses that are referenced in the Pilgrim's Progress, or that are affected by the story of the Pilgrim's Progress itself. So tomorrow is our last day. I hope you join us then as we conclude the story. Have a good day.